What happens when more and more people look the other way, or they give a wink or a tacit approval, and then those acts of political violence start to increase, and more people feel like this is a justified thing to do? That's where it gets very, very worrying.
Hello and welcome back to the Americano show. Today we're going to be talking about violence on the political left, because the new edition of Spectator World, which is out now, we only have this version of it because the printers have not sent us back the cover quite yet, is called Assassin's Creed, and it's a brilliant and fascinating piece by Max Horder, who joins me here at the Spectator's office. Max is a senior fellow at the Network Contagion Institute and an anthropologist. And Max, in this fascinating piece, which I urge all viewers to buy the magazine, subscribe and so on, you talk about this sort of network effect that's going on the political left. And it's terrifying, frankly, because there is as you say, permission structures are being granted in online culture for quite appalling acts of violence. And it seems to be happening after I commissioned this piece from you. You filed a piece, and then there was a killing that was inspired by exactly what you're talking about. So explain your thesis to us first.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing really is that America is changing, and not for the better. What we've sort of started picking up on is something we're calling an assassination culture. And what that really means is that when we think of a culture and we think about the norms and how we behave with each other, what we think is acceptable, many of the traditional norms are starting to change. And, you know, the story really does begin with the right. And that has started to change now. What we're seeing here in America in particular is a rise in that kind of violence on the left. Now, there's always going to be a kind of small amount of psychopathic individuals or people that actually commit violence. What is very alarming, what we're starting to notice, is that in more left-wing spaces, particularly on social media, there's the erosion of norms which prohibit this kind of thing. So when it comes to violence, it doesn't necessarily need to be just about the people that commit violence, because there'll always be people that do that. What the really alarming thing is, what happens when more and more people look the other way, or they give a wink or a tacit approval, and then those acts of political violence start to increase, and more people feel like this is a justified thing to do. That's where it gets very, very worrying.
Well, the term culture wars has become quite hackneyed now. But it seemed to me, reading your piece, and actually culture wars are now becoming closer to being actual wars.
Right.
It's you have the permission to destroy your enemy, to murder your
Absolutely.
enemy, because your enemy is wrong, and that we're going away from a Christian sense that killing is wrong. Right. Killing can be right and glorified if it's for the right political purpose.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about what's kind of been the dominant narrative over the past few decades, we've had this sense that who's the threat? The threat has been kind of white supremacist, fascist types. Sometimes it gets very exaggerated. Brexit, the election of Donald Trump. And they've been largely perceived by kind of mainstream media, by the kind of mainstream intelligentsia, as the real problem, the threat that really is destabilizing things and is causing all the problems. Now, the part of the reason for that is that the way in which this very thing has been studied has been very dominated by academics working on it that way. The left-wing violence, left-wing authoritarianism is almost entirely a black hole in academia. I mean, it used to be called the Loch Ness Monster of sort of scholarship around violence and authoritarianism. People just didn't really want to touch it, and it's not really important. Now, why that is, certainly at least partly because it reflects many of the dispositions and assumptions of academics themselves. And partly it's just that there was never really an incentive to explore it. It was always so much more valuable to talk about how Trump is destroying the world or this kind of thing. And so partly we've had that problem, and partly, like you said, you know, when the enemy is a Nazi, everything is justified. So this kind of idea that they're fascists, they're Nazis, Trump is this kind of new Hitler manifest, and you see this kind of exaggerated language all the time, then acts of violence and destruction become justifiable. Elon Musk, for example, is a kind of co-president And so it's fine to destroy Tesla dealerships, and it's fine to shoot or threaten to shoot the president, as nearly happened twice. And like you said, now it's moving into this idea of killing Zionists, and it gets tied up in this kind of resistance narrative. You're resisting the enemy, and you're allowed to commit violence against them.
And you're heroic. If
Absolutely.
you are, it's a hero myth that you're
Absolutely.
creating for yourself.
Absolutely, and we see that really, like as you mentioned, we've seen the killing of the Israeli embassy workers last month. We've seen more violence recently, but really the piece centers on the hero character of this chap, Luigi Mangione. Luigi Mangione, who was, for those of you who don't know, a relatively unknown 27-year-old chap from America. And one day on December 3rd, he goes to New York and he finds Brian Thompson. Brian Thompson is the former CEO of United Healthcare, I think the biggest healthcare service in America. And he shoots him dead as he goes to an investor meeting. And that's shocking enough. But what we saw online being amplified in communities online was a kind of, like you said, a hero worship, a cult worship. Partly it's a kind of, he's a hero like a Robin Hood hero. Sometimes he gets sort of seen as a saint. But either way, he becomes this kind of symbolic figurehead of the movement, a kind of totem. Now the difference is, in the olden, days, if you had your totem of your local hero or your idol or something, you'd have to carry it around. It didn't spread that much. With meme-ification now online, Luigi Mangione has become a meme, and you see him as a meme for like looking at the Luigi character. You see him in all kinds of other memes, and that spreads very quickly. In the speed of light, you can thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people can understand what the meme is about, and it can spread rapidly along networks of social media. And that's when all of these permissions, they start to fall apart, and people start getting stuck in these social media echo chambers. It's an overused term, but it's true. And they start to believe that it's normal to support this resistance hero. It's
very interesting you mentioned saints, and it is religious, isn't it? Because it's iconography.
Absolutely.
It's creating an image that quickly becomes worshipped.
Absolutely.
And the internet enables that to happen at phenomenal speeds.
Absolutely.
So we've seen, Che Guevara would be worshipped as an icon. So we've seen figures on the left who are violent figures on the left sometimes who are held up very quickly. But what's happening now is that it happens so quickly, and that's the contagion that you study.
Yes, I mean, and like Che Guevara, I think part of the puzzle here is also part of the piece of the puzzle. Luigi Mangione is a very handsome guy, like Che Guevara, so he can fit that mold very easily and very well.
Yes.
And he can become deified very quickly in that sense. But yes, absolutely, there is a strong religious component here. Luigi and many of these figures become saints and folk heroes very quickly. I think partly, though, what's very interesting is Che Guevara fighting against the Cuban dictatorship. Who's Luigi Mangione fighting against? It's sort of corporate America, it's elites more broadly. And that, it's not a dictatorship in the way that Che Guevara was fighting a dictatorship. And so the fact that he's still being deified in that way is very interesting, and I think quite worrying, quite alarming. If you think that now the enemy are sort of C-level executives at healthcare companies, and that's not to, of course, deny the ways in which the American healthcare system isn't the best in the world, and there are lots of entrenched inequalities and lots of harm that's caused by that bureaucratic system. But to move to shooting its executives as the answer to that, it's new territory, and it's very dangerous, I think.
With Mangione, particularly on this internet meme-ification of these people, it's odd how it blends into games quite quickly.
Absolutely.
I think Pokemon, he's been compared to there's a Pokemon figure that's supposed to represent Mangione.
Right.
I think there was a Mario Kart, America's Luigi, Mario. It quickly blends into a sort of silliness that makes it feel harmless.
Right.
But there has to be the real world harm for it to work.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the really interesting things I think about this case is that Luigi Mangione said he wanted to break the NPC. NPC is slang for non-playable character in video. So, in your video game, when you're a hero and you're running around, there are people that you can't play that just stand around and you can talk to and stuff. And he wanted to break that because he felt, as do many, very large amounts of people, as we can see from our survey results, feel a sense of powerlessness in their own lives, especially young people that grow up in this kind of quite nihilistic environment, and they feel like they can't really do things in their life and they can't move forward. And in many sense, that frustration is a reflection of what's going on for young people today, who do find it a lot harder to do the things their parents could do much easier, like buy a home and have a family and this kinds of thing. But it's moving now into this kind of chronic, this powerlessness, which then we see in the data seems to correlate very strongly with the justification for committing violence. It's almost like you're so powerless, you're such a non-playable character in your own life, only by striking out and causing really extreme violence can you break that sense of powerlessness.
Yes, and this NPC rhetoric ties into a sort of earlier generation of fiction, which was the Matrix and so on, that there is a technologically controlled system that you, the hero, have to break, almost as though you're in a game, you've got to break it. And that is providing inspiration for people to do terrible things in the real world because they think they are playing a game.
Absolutely.
That they've learned online.
Absolutely. I mean, and I feel part of it is because, so many young people, they do spend so much time playing games now. I mean, I don't have the stats, but really quite extreme amounts of time are spent playing these games. And, the truth is about these games is that a lot of the time, these games where you're running around and you're fighting people and you're doing this, you're doing that, they reflect what humans kind of used to do before they started working in offices and doing these kinds of things. So in some sense, they're living that kind of primordial way of being, but like you said, kind of in a fantasied version. And it becomes so... The video game and the social media and everything now, it's not like separate from us anymore. It's totally integrated in our lives. We spend as much time looking at screens and going on social media as we do talking to other people. So when there's no boundary between the video game world and the social media world and the real world, then you can expect these kind of gamified mythological fantasy figures like Luigi Mangione to pick up and then to spread with that language online.
And you said that it did have origins on the right, on the political right, and now it seems to be moved towards the left. What were the origins on the right? And do you fear that actually there's a right-wing version of that's coming on this?
Well, the right-wing violence, the right-wing authoritarianism has been something which, for reasons, I think probably because World War II and the Nazis were so overwhelmingly awful, that it's become the kind of symbolic figure of what evil is. And if you think about, for example, the European Union in so many ways defines itself not as, against the rest of the world, but against its own past. It used to be, dominated by, the right and the Nazis. And because of that, we've gone forward and now we're liberal and democratic. And so much of it is defined against that. And quite rightly, because there was so much kind of right-wing authoritarianism and violence. And that was really the story up until now. That was what we were all focused on. And then when Trump and Brexit happened, for so many people, there was this sense that, oh no, it's happening again. And this is all we need to talk about and all we need to worry about. So that plus the fact that there has been a lot of violence on the right. I mean, you can't deny, not you, but one can't deny the fact that there is violence occurring on the right. The left, though, so how has it come from the right? It seems to just have a natural habitat there. But like you said, on the left as well, over the 20th century, things like communist regimes have been responsible for very, very many more deaths, but they've been largely left out of the picture. So we're trying to understand that this focus now on the kind of left-wing violence is not to say that other kinds of violence don't happen. It's to say there's this massive gap here. We've been kind of purposefully ignoring it. Let's just look at this, which is very difficult in these very sort of tribalized times.
Well, you mentioned tribalized times, that the key point on the American left is a sense that they have, whatever they do, they've been defeated.
Right.
Because the populist right, Trump has won, and therefore their radicalism is justified because they are now unable to win in the political system.
Absolutely. And you see that some very softer version perhaps in the UK. But again, when one tacks back to the centre, there probably is more of a chance to win. I think maybe part of the problem is, for the left at least, that sense of powerlessness about winning elections is because in some ways the left doesn't really make as much sense anymore ideologically. I mean, there is no socialism really anymore. There's no communism anymore. So it sort of filters because so many people don't really know what to do. There becomes this, well, now we're the post-colonial fighters, we're fighting the power that way, but without any real answers, because no one can really say. So we know inequality is big. We know that there are people who, there is, all kinds of problems in society, but without a program to fix it, what do? You just feel powerless. And that's true for young people on a sort of micro level as well. They want to do things, they can't, they feel powerless. They get sucked into these kind of fantasy worlds, and they act out on it as well.
And reading your piece, I thought, to a certain extent, is technology replacing politics? Technology now dominates everybody's life to such an extent that even political disagreements are reflective of what we're doing online. Absolutely. They are just subsidiary to what our online brains are being trained to do.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, when you think about what humans have always done, we like the drama, we like these conflicts, and we like understanding them. Now over the past few days, we've had this big, drama between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, but it's all happening on Twitter. I mean, it's this kind of, it's so far away from all of us, and yet it's dominant to the level that kind of, in the olden days, myths would be dominant. It's something which we're all talking about, and these two great figures of our imagination are battling it out over
on their respective technological platforms.
On their platforms. So they've literally carved up. But what's interesting as well, speaking to this thing about what the left sort of is powerless, is you could see both with Brexit, less on the technology side, but with Brexit, it was sort of Boris versus David Cameron. On the right, in America now, it's Elon versus Trump. It's not left and right. It's sort of two kinds of right.
Yes.
It almost feels like the left has disintegrated ideologically and doesn't really know where to move forward. So it does sort of things, but then it's all playing out on this kind of technological sphere.
Max, it's absolutely fascinating to talk to you. I do hope you'll come on again because your work is extremely interesting. And thank you again for the excellent piece. I'm going to wave it around one more time for the camera. This is Spectator World. Do subscribe. We'll put a link in the YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Max.
Thank you.